This story features a 13-year-old boy that's on a plane flying over a forest when suddenly the pilot has a heart attack. What do you think the boy is going to have to do to get out of this situation?
For a time that he could not understand, Brian could do nothing. Even after his mind began working and he could see what had happened, he could do nothing. It was as if his hands and arms were lead. Then he looked for ways for it not to have happened. Be asleep, his mind screamed at the pilot. Just be asleep and your eyes will open now, and your hands will take the controls and your feet will move to the pedals. But it did not happen. The pilot did not move except that his head rolled on a neck impossibly loose as the plane hit a small bit of turbulence. The plane. Somehow the plane was still flying. Seconds had passed, nearly a minute, and the plane flew on as if nothing had happened, and he had to do something. Had to do something, but did not know what. Help. He had to help. He stretched one hand toward the pilot, saw that his fingers were trembling, and touched the pilot on the chest. He did not know what to do. He knew there were procedures that you could do mouth-to-mouth on victims of heart attacks and push their chests, CPR, but he did not know how to do it, and in any case, could not do it with the pilot, who was sitting up in the seat and still strapped in with the seatbelt. So he touched the pilot with the tips of his fingers, touched him on the chest, and could feel nothing. No heartbeat, no rise and fall of breathing, which meant that the pilot was almost certainly dead. Please, Brian said, but did not know what or who to ask. Please. The plane lurched again, hit more turbulence, and Brian felt the nose drop. It did not dive, but the nose went down slightly, and the down angle increased the speed. And he knew that at this angle, this slight angle down, he would ultimately fly into the trees. He could see them ahead on the horizon, where before he could see only sky. He had to fly it somehow, had to fly the plane. He had to help himself. The pilot was gone beyond anything he could do. He had to try and fly the plane. He turned back in the seat, facing the front, and put his hands, still trembling, on the control wheel, his feet gently on the rudder pedals. You pulled back on the stick to raise the plane. He knew that from reading. You always pulled back on the wheel. He gave it a tug, and it slid back toward him easily, too easily. The plane, with the increased speed from the tilt down, swooped eagerly up and drove Brian's stomach down.
What would you try to do in this situation?
He pushed the wheel back in, went too far this time, and the plane's nose went below the horizon, and the engine's speed increased with the shallow dive. Too much. He pulled back again, more gently this time, and the nose floated up again. Too far, but not as violently as before. Then a bit too much, up again as before, then down a bit too much, up again, very easily, and the front of the engine cowling settled. When he had aimed it at the horizon, it had seemed to be steady. He had held the wheel where it was, let out his breath, which he had been holding in all this time, and tried to think what to do next. It was a clear sky. It was a clear blue sky day with fluffy bits of clouds here and there. He looked out the window for a moment, hoping to see something, a town or a village, but there was nothing, just green of the trees, endless green. Lakes scattered more and more thickly as the planes flew. Where? He was flying, but did not know where, had no idea where he was going. Looked at the dashboard of the plane, studied the dials, and hoped to get some help, hoped to find a compass. But it was all so confusing, a jumble of numbers and lights. One lighted up display in the top corner center of the dashboard said, number 342. Another next to it said 22. Down beneath were dials with lines that seemed to indicate what the winds were doing, tipping and moving, and one dial with a needle pointing at the number 70, which he only thought might be the altimeter, the device that told him the height above the ground, or above sea level. Somewhere he had read something about altimeters and couldn't remember what or where or anything about them. Slightly to the left and below the altimeter, he said a small rectangular panel with lighted dials and two knobs. His eye had passed it over 2 or 3 times before he had saw what was written in tiny letters on top of the panel. Transmitter, 221. was stamped in the metal it had hit. Finally, this was the radio. The radio, of course. He had used the radio when the pilot had been hit. He could only bring himself to say that the pilot was dead. Couldn't think of it. He had been trying to use the radio.
Why do you think the boy tries to revive the pilot?